We're talking about a truly stunning geopolitical standoff, a crisis that really it questions the very foundation of the Western alliance. I mean, think about it. What happens when two NATO allies are on the brink of war with each other?
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the explosive events of January 2026. Then we're going to hit rewind and see how a supposedly absurd real estate deal just spiraled into this global crisis. After that, we'll get into the pressure campaign, how the world pushed back, and finally, the huge global fallout from all of this.
All right, first up, an alliance on the brink. I mean, how did we even get here? Just picture this for a second. It's early 2026. The United States, a founder of NATO, is openly threatening another founding member, Denmark. And it's all over its own sovereign territory.
And then came this quote. This wasn't some behind-the-scenes diplomatic whisper. No, this was a direct threat from the American president, and it sent absolute shockwaves across the globe. This is not diplomatic language, not by a long shot. It's an ultimatum, and it just shot the tension between these allies to a level nobody had ever seen before.
And the response? It was immediate. We're talking about a military operation called Arctic Endurance. More than 10 European nations, we're talking heavy hitters like the UK, Germany, and France, they all started deploying troops to Greenland. Their mission? To defend its sovereignty against threats from their own ally, the US.
So all of this just begs a massive question, right? How on earth did two allies who've been historically super close end up on the brink of a conflict over the world's largest island? To get that answer, we've got to go back a bit.
Okay, so let's rewind. To really get what's happening now, we have to look at the origins. This whole thing didn't just pop up out of nowhere with military threats. Nope. It started years earlier with a business proposition that, honestly, most people just thought was a joke.
So back in 2019, during his first term, President Trump floated this idea of buying Greenland. And it was met with, well, pretty much total disbelief. The Danish prime minister called it an absurd discussion. And at the time, everyone kind of figured, okay, that's the end of that. But it turns out that moment was actually setting the stage for all the friction to come.
Now, what's fascinating is that U.S. interest in Greenland isn't totally new. Way back in 1946, President Truman secretly offered to buy it. But look at the difference here. The whole approach, the rhetoric, it's a night and day change. We went from quiet, post-World War II diplomacy to very public, very forceful demands. And the motive? It was described as a psychological need for ownership. Just a completely different ballgame. All right, let's move on to how this whole thing escalated. Because after the 2024 re-election, the push for Greenland went from being this kind of dismissed, absurd offer to something else entirely. A sustained, systematic campaign of pressure. And analysts, people who study this stuff, they have a specific term for this kind of strategy: hybrid warfare. And what does that mean? Well, it's not about a conventional invasion with tanks and soldiers. It's about using everything but that: political pressure, economic threats, even fake news, all to undermine Denmark's control and stir up trouble. And if you look at the timeline for 2025, you can see a clear pattern of this pressure ramping up. It starts kind of low-key, right? Unofficial visits, reports of social media campaigns. But then it gets serious. The vice president shows up uninvited to a space base. A U.S. commander there gets fired for not playing along. And then, the final step, a special envoy is appointed whose stated goal is to make Greenland part of the U.S. That's not subtle. But here's the thing. This pressure campaign wasn't happening in a vacuum. It absolutely triggered a powerful and I think surprisingly unified response. And not just from Denmark or the Greenlandic people, but from leaders all over the political map, in Europe and even back in the United States. And really, the most important voices in this whole crisis have been the people of Greenland themselves. They made it crystal clear through huge protests and official statements, like this one. They have just emphatically rejected the U.S. demands. For them, this wasn't about real estate. It was a fundamental issue of self-determination. Meanwhile, back in the States, what did the American public think? Well, there was almost zero appetite for this kind of confrontation. A YouGov poll found that the opposition to a military invasion was overwhelming. I mean, look at that. Only 8% of people were in favor. And it wasn't just the public. The political opposition in the U.S. was, and this is key, bipartisan. You had prominent Republicans, people like Mitch McConnell and Lisa Murkowski, joining Democrats to slam the administration's threats.
Some even took it a step further, introducing laws to block any funding for military action. And one Republican congressman even predicted it would be grounds for impeachment. That's how serious this was. So let's talk about the global fallout. Because this wasn't just some little diplomatic spat, oh no. It spilled over into the global economy and started raising these huge existential questions about the future of the entire NATO alliance. So when those European allies sent troops to Greenland as part of Operation Arctic Endurance, how did the US respond? It launched a trade war. The administration slapped significant tariffs on the very same allies who were involved. It was a direct economic punishment for their decision to defend another NATO member.
And that action, in turn, got people in Europe talking about using a powerful new economic weapon of their own. It's called the anti-coercion instrument, but everyone just calls it the trade bazooka. And think about that name. It's a tool designed for economic defense, for sure, but it was absolutely never meant to be aimed at an ally like the United States.
You know, when you step back, the ultimate takeaway for so many analysts was the huge strategic cost of all this. This internal fight inside NATO, it was seen as a massive victory for adversaries like Russia and China. Because a divided West just weakens the whole idea of collective security. It creates all these diplomatic gaps that they can just jump in and exploit. And all of that leaves us with a final, really provocative question. This whole crisis, which started from a proposal that was once just laughed off as absurd, it really forces us to think about how fragile these alliances can be in the 21st century. I mean, what truly holds an alliance together when the trust between its members is so completely broken?